All right, so let's run this. And we are here, local assignment, login. And we are, let's see, Bob and Bob. Right, we have websites. Okay, so here's where we are, right? And we can, website, do we have widgets? I think we had widgets, didn't we? So page 1, 2, 3, widget? No, do we have that? I thought we did. Oh, yes, thank you. This is maybe like that. Something like that. Yes, all right, so we did do that. Okay, so right now all this data exists on the client side. Let's start moving some of this stuff over to the server side. Okay? All right, so let's do that. Let's see. We are here, and right now all our user logic is here in the controllers, and we have the templates for these over here. Correct? For the login controller. Right now, what's happening here is what? Let's see. When we log in, we're looking at this user service is calling this findUserByCredentials, correct? And findUserByCredentials. Let me close all the other ones. Is implemented right here, user service client right there, right? And what's it doing is that it's just iterating over the array of users and trying to find them by username and password, correct? Right? So it's working on a local array, which is implemented right here in the user service. All right, so we want to move this over to the server side, right? This is not where it belongs. Okay. Instead, what we want to do instead is that when we get this, when we find a user by credential. Instead, what we want to be able to do is the following. Okay, we want to send a request to the server. Say, hey, server, they're trying to find this user by credentials. Right? Please let me know if this user exists. Right? So something like what we asked here. Right? The URL should be following this URL pattern. Right, for the user, this one, find user by credential, is this one right there, this URL pattern. Okay, so somehow we have to hit the server with this URL pattern. Okay, so to do that, we need to be able to generate an HTTP request right here in the code. Right? So to do that, we're going to be using a native service, right? That is an Angular service that allows you to generate HTTP requests, right? Just like $scope allows us to interact with the DOM, right, in an object-oriented manner, $HTTP allows you to interact with a server, right, using HTTP requests, right. A lot of these services is what they're trying to do is to create a nice layer of abstraction between two worlds, right. $scope is using the object-oriented analogy, right. To be able to interact with the DOM, right? The DOM is a template world, is a ASCII world, is a browser rendering world, right? And we want to be able to interact with that other world in an object-oriented way, right? So that's what $scope does, right? $HTTP wants us to be able to communicate from an object-oriented world, which is this JavaScript world. We want to communicate using a kind of like a serialized world, right, that streams data across the wire, right, to some other place, right, using a agreed upon format, right, and the format is HTTP, right. HTTP says that communication happens with a message that has a body, has a headers, right, has cookies, it has all these things, right, and all these bits back and forth between two processes, right? So $HTTP gives you the APIs to be able to communicate between these two worlds. Make sense? All right. So in the find user by credential, we would like to be able to participate in this HTTP communication schema, right? And the communication is that the different ways of communicating is by using HTTP verbs, right? Which there's quite a few. We're only going to use 4 of them, right? One of them is going to be the get verb, right? That allows us, like the name suggests, retrieve data from the server. Hey server, I'm trying to read data, okay? And then a unique identifier that uniquely identifies the type of data that I want. Oops. Uh-oh. Copy. So I'm going to paste that in there. Okay. So presumably on the server, somebody's going to be listening to this incoming request, right? And the server hopefully will respond with an appropriate that matches what I need here. Okay. So let's see. Let's create a GET request. We need a password here, and we have it right there. So I'm just going to concatenate it right there. Okay, and username here as well. We're going to just concatenate that in there. Okay, so this is going to go out as a request to the server. All right. So let's try this out. If we go back to our login page, here's our login page, and we try to log in now. Let's inspect. And if we look at the network and we try to do Bob, and we say login, notice what's going on here. Notice that there was a network connection here that went out to the server, right? But the server is responding, says, I don't know what to do with this URL. Right? What do you want me to do with it? There's nothing mapped to this URL. There's no page mapped to this. Notice that if I do this, notice that all these requests are successful, right? They're all black. You see that? Right. Notice that the server I asked for this URL, localhost 3000 yada 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 login.view.client.html, and the server says, "Yep, I found that." Right. Where is it? It's in the public directory. I found it. Right. I'm just going to return it to you. Right. The default behavior is that this slash right here, that slash is mapped to the public directory. That's the default behavior. Okay. And after anything that follows that is going to be mapped to a physical directory on the file system. Yes. So presumably it's going to look for a directory under public that is called assignment Wednesday. There it is. And then under there user. There it is, user. Under there templates. Right. There it is, templates. And then finally login view.client.html. That one right there. So it found it. That's what's returning, and that's how this gets rendered on the left-hand side. Everybody okay? Right. So when I then try to here type Bob, and I say login, notice that another request went out. See that? There it is. And the request is exactly what I generated. There it is. API user username Bob password equal Bob. Yes? Which is exactly what we're sending right here. This get. Right? But the server says, I don't see any directory call API. Is there a directory call API? No. Under public directory, there is no directory call API. Right? So it's complaining and says there's nothing mapped to that. Right? So instead, what we want to do is map it to something and return what the user object that represents that username and password. Correct? Okay. So we don't really want to return. We don't want to do what these other requests are doing. Notice that all these requests are returning HTML. They're returning JavaScript, HTML. Okay, they are physical, static content under the public directory. They are static, right? As the server is concerned, all these HTML files, all these JavaScript files, they're just ASCII files. Right? And they're always going to be the same files, if they map to the same URL. Here, this request is not going to be static. Yes? Because depending on the username and password, I should get a different object. All right? Notice that now I'm not getting content. I'm not returning HTML. I'm not returning JavaScript. What am I supposed to be returning here? A JSON object. Data. Okay? So this URL I want to treat it differently. I want to treat it dynamically. I don't want it to be static. I want to calculate what this is going to return. Everybody okay? All right. So I want to respond to this. So let's generate something that responds to this. Yes? Let's do that. So on the server side, what we're going to do is we're going to, on the server.js, right, we're going to do all our work under another module. We're going to load that module, which doesn't exist just yet. We're going to put it under a local directory called assignment, and app.js. Okay, so that app.js, according to this, it's in the local directory, app, assignment, and then app.js. Actually, I'm going to say assignment Wednesday, because I'm going to have to do this again in the morning class. Yes?
So is it good practice to include passwords in the GET requests?
No. They're going to be all encrypted. And we'll do that when we get to security. In security, we're going to encrypt everything, right? Back and forth, we're going to encrypt. Also on the database, at first we're going to store it in plain text, but then we're going to encrypt everything. Yep. All right. So so according to this, it's in a directory called assignment Wednesday. So let's create that. Assignment Wednesday. And notice that it's outside of the public directory. That means that somebody from the browser, they're not going to be able to access anything outside of the public directory is not accessible to the server. Okay, nobody can actually type a URL that would navigate outside of the public directory. Okay, so if I put it here in the assignment Wednesday, notice that it's not in the public directory, so it's not publicly accessible. So anything that I put here is not publicly accessible. So I'm going to put app.js. And in app.js, bless you, we're going to just say console.log. This is web app maker server side. Okay? So if we restart the server, notice that indeed it says web app maker server side. See that? Right? It loaded that. It loaded this package. It loaded this module. Right? This require JS right here. This require loaded that app.js. Everybody okay? All right. But it's not following the module name structure. So we're going to put everything inside of a module. Export. This is the equivalent of the IFI pattern. Right? This is the equivalent of the IFI pattern on the browser side. Module.exports allows you to create modules on Node.js. Yes? On the client side, we create modules using the IFI pattern. All right? Okay. So here we create a function, and same thing. We're going to do a console log web app maker server module. All right. If we restart the server, we are okay. It didn't work. All right, we missed something here. Notice that it's a function, so we need to treat it as a constructor. Right, so we're going to treat it as a constructor. That's going to instantiate. It's going to run that function. It's going to treat this. It's going to load that, and then it's going to run it. That function, this is mapped to this function, and unless we actually execute the function, nothing will execute inside of that function. Right, so this parentheses here executes this function. Right, so if we reload it, there it is, web app maker server module. Yes, everybody okay? All right. All right. So one more thing. So we're going to do all our work in this module here. Right. Here's where we want to respond to that incoming request from the client. Okay. Right. So let's do that. But to do that, we need the instance of Express. We need Express to be able to reply or listen for incoming HTTP requests. So we're going to pass the app, which is the instance, the Express instance. We're going to pass it here, there it is, as an argument, and we're going to receive it here as an attribute, as a parameter right here. Okay? So we want to listen for an incoming GET request that has the URL pattern. This is the URL pattern. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to be listening for something like this. And if I do get that request, I would like to respond. I would like to execute this function, right? If that URL comes in to the server, right? So I'm going to say console log find user by credentials. Okay, HTTP service. Okay, let's see. So if I refresh, okay, notice that I don't have anything here. I'm going to put this on the right-hand side. Over here, I'm going to refresh this. And if I do a Bob, and I do login, and nothing happened. Huh? Wait a minute. Wait, let me see. Wait, did I restart the server? I don't remember. Did I restart the server? I did, didn't I? I thought I did. Let's see. Try it again. Let me see what's going on here. The server is going out. The URL is /API user. Let's see. /API user get ampersand. Ooh, what's this? Actually, everything after the query is ignored by the server. Okay. We'll see that in a minute. All right, let's restart this. Let's try it again. Log in. There it is. Notice that we went to the server, right, and the server is doing a console, wrote find user by credentials HTTP service. Yes? Everybody okay? Notice that the browser, if I click on it, notice that I haven't yet gotten a response from the server. The server received the request, yes? The server printed out in the console that it received the request. But notice what this is saying. It says that it's still pending. See that? Pending? Right? So the request went out to the server, but the server never responded. Right? It printed out something in the console, but never actually responded anything. All right? So this is the first part of what it's called a client-server HTTP request, right? And the cycle starts at the client, the server fulfills that request, and then it responds back to the client with some response, a successful or unsuccessful response, right? Right now, we only did the first part. The client generated the request, but we never sent back a response, right? Okay, so to be able to participate in that request response cycle, right? This function, Node.js, the Express library, passes this function. It passes it two objects. One object, the first object, represents the incoming request from the client, and the other object represents an object that can be used to generate a response back to the client. Okay. So, for instance, we could respond. We could respond to the back to the client. We can send back a 200, meaning okay, right? That's an HTTP okay response, right? So if we restart this and regenerate this, let me clear this. Let me clear that. So if I generate a Bob and then say login, notice that now the request is successful. The request is successful. Notice that I got a 200 back from the client, from the server. See that? Right? Very good. All right. I think this function like this is very hard to read. So a nicer way to read this a little bit better is I'm going to move the function out of here. Okay? I'm going to move it out of here. Instead, I'm going to give it a name. Right? I'll call it find user by credentials. Okay? And then here's a function and give it a name, an actual name. Instead of using anonymous functions, which makes it harder to read, I'm going to ask you to please declare all HTTP URL handlers at the top, and then implement the functions at the below it. All right. Right. So I'm going to copy this and paste it here. All right. Okay. It should behave exactly the same way. So if I say Bob, and log in, I get a response 200. Everybody good? Okay. Great. All right. So to be able to notice that in the request we are passing these attributes, username and password. Yes. So we need to be able to parse these from the query string. Everything after the question mark is referred to as the query string, right? That allows you to pass parameters from the client to the server. For instance, we're passing username and password here. Yes, right. So let's try to extract these username and passwords from the query. Okay. To do that, we're going to be using the request object. Right. Remember, the request object represents everything that is coming from the client. What's coming from the client? Well, we'll see. Let's see. All these headers are going out. These headers are generated by the browser. Right. So all this is accessible to the server through that request object. Right. Cookies are being sent. Okay. A timestamp when this was generated. Also, all this is being sent. The URL obviously is being sent. These parameters are parsed by Express. It parses a URL and it provides these in a map, a nice map that we can parse. Okay. So to retrieve those parameters, okay, query parameters. Those are available in request that I think it's query. All right, so we can do a console log query parameters. Okay, so if we refresh the server and we refresh this and we try again Bob and Bob, and say login. Notice that indeed the server, right, has access to that query. See, username Bob, password Bob. See that? So we have that. We can retrieve it. We can be a little more specific. We can say username request.query.username and var password request.query.password. Oops. Okay. Everybody good? All right. So what we could do now is that we could, if we had the data of those users, there they are. If we had them on the server, we could try and find them. Right there they are. That's a user, and so we could try and find the user matching the username and password. Yes, right. So we could do something like users. I'm going to try and find a user that has user password matches the password that you passed me, and the user username matches the username that you passed me as an argument, right? And that's going to return var the user. Okay. Once I have the user, I can just send the user back to the client, the object. Now I have the object, presumably. Let's do a console log. Let's see if we have it, if we found it. Okay, let's restart the server. Let's see, let's refresh. Let's do Bob. Oops, something happened. Query params. What happened to query params? Oh, console. Let me restart again. Send again. There it is. See that? It printed out Bob. That's the object we found, right, for that user. We can then just send back that object that we just found on the server, send it back to the client. Okay? And the way we can send it, instead of sending 200, we can actually send the actual user object. Okay? So that, notice that right now, all these are returning what? The response that is coming from the server is what? It's just OK. Is it 200? It's just 200, right? Which is the HTTP OK, symbol number for OK. Yes? Right? Instead, what we want is the actual object. Right? So let's do that. Right? Let's restart. And here, let's send Bob and Bob. And let's clear this out. Let's send it. There it is. Let's see what came back. There it is. Notice that the response contains the object for Bob, for the user Bob. See that? All right. So we have it now on the browser. We have it on the browser. So that, where is that? That's right here, right on the client. This client found it. Yes, this HTTP has that object now, that user object. So I'm just going to return. I'm going to return whatever that get returns. Yes? And who uses that? It's used by the controller. The controller is right here, right? User service. So this, right, should return the user object. Yes? Right? Let's console log user that came back from the server. The object that came back from the server. Okay, so let's refresh. And let's do Bob. And in the console, let's do a login. Okay, so this is what comes back from the server. It's not exactly what we were expecting. It's not an actual user object, right? But actually in the network, that's what actually came back, the user object. See that? It did come back. But that HTTP.get request didn't actually return the user object. Instead, what it returned to us is this weird something other, a promise. All right? It's kind of like, yes, at some point, maybe I'll send you back the user object. Right? And the reason is that what's happening here is that you have these two processes that are running independent of each other, right? They're not, I mean, in this particular case, they're both running on my machine, obviously, yes? But in a typical system, these would be completely two different processes, right? The browser is running on your machine, and the server is running, halfway across the world, yes? So the communication there might be some latency between these two processes, okay? So the script, the JavaScript engine that is running on your browser cannot have the luxury of waiting indefinitely for the service on the server side to just take its time and at some point come back. All right. What if it takes too long? Right. So instead, we're going to use a technique that is asynchronous. Instead of being a synchronous communication between a client talking to a server, it's going to be an asynchronous communication. Okay. Because the browser is too busy to wait for the server, right? The browser only has one single JavaScript thread, right? It cannot risk it to just be waiting on the server to respond, right? And the server might take a couple milliseconds, might take a second, might take a couple of seconds, right? And the browser only has this one JavaScript thread, right? If it just blocks it waiting for this, it cannot continue doing other things. Like if the user is clicking around, it cannot listen for any click events. Yes, right. The browser application would be blocked until the server comes back. Make sense? So instead, we use this asynchronous communication. And the way it works is that the JavaScript, the Angular JavaScript, uses a technique called AJAX, right? That says, hey browser, you know how to do all sorts of asynchronous things, and you have a whole bunch of threads, and no, you know how to download all sorts of things at the same time, right? You know how to go out and start downloading all these images and JavaScript and all these things simultaneously. I can't do that, right? So the JavaScript is asking the browser, hey browser, you deal with this HTTP request. Notify me when it's successful, right? Or when you hear back from the server, right? So please handle this request. I'm going to go do a whole bunch of other things, right? When it comes back from the server, please notify me, all right? So what we do is we register a callback with this AJAX service from the browser, and the browser will eventually call us back saying, hey, you know that function, that thing you were waiting for? It came back eventually. Here it is, and here's what they responded. Make sense? Right? So this HTTP right here, what it returns is an object that allows us to register for a callback. Yes? Right? Meaning we're going to give it a function that it will be called sometime later. Okay, so the controller, what we get here is not a user object. We get instead a promise. We get a promise to call you back at a later time. Right? So this promise allows us to register for successful or failed HTTP requests. So we would say, if it was successful, this is the function that I want you to call. This is the function that I want. What do I want to do here? This is the logic that I want to do if it's successful. Right? The logic that I already had there. Right? The logic that I already had there. Right? And guess what we get back here in this function? We get the data that came back from the server. Right? So here we have the user object. See that? That's the user object we get back from the server. Right? So this promise allows us to register a function that will be invoked later when the response comes back from the server, right? And it will pass us the data that came back from the server. Make sense? Everybody okay? All right. Let's try this again. Let's refresh the page, the server. Let's go back and try login again. And we're going to say Bob. There it is. Okay, we are back where we were before we started all this. Right? We're back to profile. Everybody okay? All right, but the find by user by credential now lives where? On the server. Okay? So we can in the service, on the user service clients, we can remove this. This is no longer needed. Everybody okay? Everybody with me? All right. Okay, okie dokie. How about all the other ones? What about this one? How about this profile? It's returning Bob and Marley. Where is that coming from? That's coming from the profile, right? And the user controller profile trying to retrieve the user here, right? There it is, right? User service find user by ID. Right? And notice that it's still using what? It's still using the service client, find user by ID, this one, right? Find user by ID. It's still using the local users declared here in the user service. So we need to move that to the server as well. Okay? And we'll do that after this break. Let's have a 5-minute break, and we'll come back right after this.